All right. So we have the immense pleasure of being back again with Aaron Nesmith-Beck. Aaron, welcome back, man.
Hey, Christofer. Yeah, good to be with you again.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have time to go over all the fun stuff last time, so I'm just gonna jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
You said last time that you were wearing earplugs on the subway, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I've started trying that a little bit, especially on days when I'm tired.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually like it. I really like
Yeah,
it.
yeah, me too. Yeah. Also on planes, I do it sometimes. It's also
Oh
good.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so I think I leveled up because I use like
nice.
these in-ear earbuds. So they are like kind of like earplugs when it comes to noise, but then I also have noise canceling in the earphones. So I've like doubled up
Nice.
on that.
Nice,
So
nice, nice.
complete silence. And
Yeah. I
I took it too far, and I wore them once when I was on the subway with my wife, and she didn't appreciate that at all. But it was very peaceful. It was peaceful until I took them off.
She's like,
Yeah.
Christofer, why aren't you listening?
Yeah. Yeah. It was on date night too, so I shouldn't have done that. But you live and you
Yeah,
learn.
that's awesome.
But so yeah, I wanted to add something to the things we spoke about last time. We went through the list there of some potential objections to using drugs in general, but also psychedelics more specifically. And one objection I've come across, for instance, when I've argued with my brother, who is very, very smart and he's studying to be a psychologist, and he seemed to think, when we drilled down into his intuitions there, he seemed to think that it's cheating.
Mm.
Like it's
Right,
there's
right.
something about it where it feels either that it's fake, as in whatever insights you have, it's just the effects of the drugs, and so it doesn't count, or that it's somehow less valuable because you've sidestepped maybe the hard work it takes to get there. We were speaking about meditation, for instance, and you said that it's a very quick way to some mystical states that might take you a decade to meditate your way to. And yeah, like there seems like there's something cheaty about it. I don't agree about that, and I have my view on that, but I'd be curious what you would say to that objection.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think a lot of people have that intuition or about this, where it's feels like a shortcut or something, and therefore it's not justified or not deserved. I think they're just different. They're just different things, and that's fine. Yeah, of course there's some overlap in the states, and it's true that psychedelics will get you to places much more quickly, certain places much more quickly than meditation will. There's this kind of fast on the way up and fast on the way down, and typically the results are not as lasting or durable as they might be with meditation. But we're only talking about subjective states, right? There's nothing fake about the experience itself, because it's just it's literally just somebody's subjective experience, and you can induce that in a bunch of different ways. And it doesn't really make sense. It sort of seems to me like a mapping of some outside moral or ethical framework about like a normative idea that it ought to be the case that these things should only be attainable through tons and tons of hard work or something like that. And that's obviously just not the case, because you can get to the same states. And there's even been research on this, on mystical experiences induced through other means, induced through psychedelics. And, they're using certain criteria to measure mystical experience, which you could debate about, but they showed that the psychedelic induced mystical experiences were equal or greater on all of these criteria than the ones that came about by other means. So it's pretty clear that they're the same states, and they're different means to get there. And there's advantages and disadvantages of the different means, and it makes sense to talk about those. You could imagine like somebody sort of using psychedelics as a shortcut constantly and not being very, very wise or intentional about it. But this whole like cheating aspect to it, I think does seem to me like an external framework that's then being applied to just these things that happen to exist the way that they do.
Yeah. I think people might imagine that the sense, like the drug is doing the work, whereas I would say that it's your mind doing the work. Always, you have to relate creatively to the sensations that are being created with the drug, and then also that um, having the mystical experience is one thing, and it might be valuable to actually step up incrementally towards the mystical experience, like in certain meditative traditions where you need some kind of background knowledge before you get there. Kind of like making money, like being rich and being able to handle money well takes know-how. So when people win the lottery and they go from being poor and being really poor at handling money to being rich overnight, they have no fucking idea how to handle that money usually, and they usually end up in worse situations. I can see there being something analogous there, but
Mm-hmm.
I also think that these ailments we're talking about, mistaken ideas that people have about themselves, about how they can't do stuff, about how they, like they're suffering, they have these hang-ups, these irrational, often looping idea plexus in their minds that they weren't born with, and that they would have been better off if they weren't there in the first place. I just find it weird to say that we shouldn't wipe it as quick as possible. If it's possible to take a shortcut, that sounds like a great thing.
Yeah, I guess maybe there's an important distinction between using psychedelics to heal different ailments versus using them to attain certain spiritual or transpersonal states. Although obviously there's a lot of intermixing there, but like I could see the cheating argument having a little more merit in the sort of spiritual attainment side of things. But talking about cheating in terms of like
Healing
beating
PTSD.
an alcohol, yeah, exactly, yeah. PTSD
yeah, exactly.
or an alcohol addiction or something just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
No, it's true. And even in the case of the mystical experience, I mean, people like Sam Harris have argued that they would never have gotten interested in meditation if it weren't for that initial drug experience. So I mean, it's
Yeah, as a catalyst, it can just be huge.
Yeah. Did you hear that, Daniel? Yeah, I'm gonna give this to my brother. All right, so something I forgot to ask you about last time that we mentioned it in passing, but we didn't really go into details, is the idea of bad trips or challenging trips, taking a psychedelic and having a really tough time, essentially. And yeah, so I think that's something that could be very valuable to go into some practical tips there, both what we can do to prevent them in the first place, because I mean that's the best thing. But if they happen, how can you handle them if you're by yourself? How can a trip sitter help you if there's one available? So yeah, maybe you can start by just outlining what a bad trip is or a challenging trip is in your mind, and how it might look, and then we can go into how to mitigate them.
Yeah, I guess it would be characterized by negative emotion, maybe like a lot of physical discomfort. That can be something people have, especially with mushrooms, because there's this kind of like plant matter digesting in your stomach, and that can be unpleasant. Frightening thoughts or images, repressed memories can come up that are uncomfortable. The experience of things being so different can be unsettling and scary for people. It can feel kind of rocky especially on the come up, like, whoa, everything's sort of dissolving, and, you know, depending on dosage and everything, but everything's dissolving, like things are melting. Like people can sometimes get scared that they're going crazy. Usually that only happens if they don't have a great sense of what it's going to be like going into it. But, or they can, you know, there could be a fear that you're going to get stuck like that forever.
Yeah.
Things are not going to go back to normal. So there's a sort of range of different, fears or anxieties that can come up. And then usually it's at least in my own experience, it's some combination of the physical, the mental,
Yeah.
anxiety or physical discomfort or whatever. Like those things kind of blend together even more than they are in day-to-day life on a psychedelic. So like if you start getting nauseous, it can be really easy to just have negative thoughts, and for those things to become really, really blended together. So that's an overview, I guess, of the different things. I mean, and then we could talk about trauma potentially as well as being part of this, or like trauma surfacing. Obviously, that can be really unpleasant for people. So that can be a big part of it if somebody has had trauma.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to add to that because we're on the same page when it comes to the usefulness of psychedelics. I just want to add a personal anecdote here and my opinion on the idea of, some people are very adamant that no, there are no bad trips, there are only challenging trips.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea of framing it as challenging because that helps a lot in terms of how you deal with it and how you interpret it and work with it afterwards. So I think that's a good heuristic, but there are such things as just horribly bad trips. And I can say for myself that when I was 19, I had actually on cannabis, which is surprising. I think most people would
Mm-hmm.
consider that quite mild in comparison. But I had no concept at all about a bad trip, or I never felt paranoia, or I didn't know what a panic attack was. And I had way too much weed with my then girlfriend, and started having the best time of my life. And then all of a sudden I just felt like, wait, this feels really pleasurable, but does it? Does it feel bad? And then it was like, the way I remember it, like in movies when you see lockdown mode, emergency mode in a nuclear plant or something, and everything becomes red and things are blaring. And there was absolute nightmare. For 3 hours, I had a full-blown panic attack. And after that, I got panic disorder and anxiety disorder for almost a decade. So I would say I had PTSD from that, basically.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any, like today would have been so much easier because I know it's okay to cry or scream or whatever I felt like I wanted to do in that moment. But I had to play it cool in front of my girlfriend, and I wanted her, like, I didn't want to be weak and all the things we spoke about last time.
Mm-hmm,
so it was just all internalized. And like the sympathetic branch of the nervous system was just tightened to a T, and then it never relaxed after that. And depersonalization, disassociation for many years, So I really want to stress that you should not play around with these things if you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this would have been so much better if I had a sitter, if I was prepared beforehand. Like none of that could have happened. I don't think it could happen to me today. But yeah, so there are things such as just plainly bad trips, and so people shouldn't be too blasé about it either.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I like the framing of challenging trips as well, and I think a lot of a lot of the negative aspects of trips can be worked through for benefit. But like you're saying, it's totally possible to just suffer a lot, and for there to be no benefit, and for there to be, it's not like you're working through something. It's like you're just suffering a lot, and then you come out and you can be worse off for it, and that happens, and it's real. I've known other people who've had things like that happen. But a point on your comment about cannabis. So that's an interesting one, because it's true that in this sort of mainstream, cannabis is considered like a lighter drug compared to psilocybin or LSD, let's say. And it's true that the effects are in some ways like a lot less intense. But I've had more bad experiences with cannabis than I have with any psychedelics. And if I take a high dose of cannabis versus a high dose of mushrooms, the likelihood that it will go badly or that it will be unpleasant with cannabis is way higher for me personally. And especially like edibles, like I've had like bad experiences with edibles where I just ate way too much weed and was so similar kinds of stuff. Like, time just slows down to eternity, and it's like I get super anxious or paranoid about things, and
I hate weed, man.
It's
Fucking hate it.
So I don't think we're the only ones who feel this way. But no, it's a good point.
I had a psychiatrist on who told me that statistically, I mean, we still don't know much about mechanism, but when it comes to the correlation between drug use and schizophrenia or psychotic episodes, weed blows all the psychedelics out of the water.
I didn't know that. Or is that controlling for the total number of uses? Because I would imagine there's just way more cannabis use than psychedelic use, you know.
That's a good question. I don't know. I would assume, knowing the guy, I would assume he wouldn't make an unfair comparison like that. But my real answer is I don't know.
But yeah, to go back to the bad trip. I guess another sort of to increase the resolution of it a little bit. I guess like sometimes people have quote unquote bad trips or challenging trips that are negative for the whole time. But I think much more frequently they'll just be like part of a trip that's really challenging or negative, and they're often, in my own experience and what I've seen with other people too, is there can often be a kind of arc to it where there can be a build up to a negative point, and then there's some sort of like catharsis or release or facing the shadow or whatever, and then from that point on it becomes very blissful or can be, and euphoric or just like really pleasant or compassionate feeling or whatever. So I think having a trip that has bad moments is super super common, or scary moments is super super common, or anxious moments. It's just really common.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes all the difference in the world to hear beforehand. Well, you might have some tough times. You might experience fear and paranoia or whatever it is, but that's okay, and nothing can happen, and you will come out the other end. But when you have no conception of that being even a possibility, and it's supposed to be all fun and games, and then this shows up, then it's much, much harder to deal with. And I agree with you. I think, almost always when I've done any of these things, I have tough times, but I kind of, I want that now. That's part of the empowerment that we spoke about last time, where you come out the other end feeling stronger.
Right.
But so what would be the best ways to prevent a purely bad trip, and what would be some things one can do if they find themselves in a very panicky paranoia type situation?
Yeah, preventative. I think most of the sort of standard advice about having it go well, I guess, kind of also applies, like set and setting, and being safe and being intentional and choosing an appropriate dose, and maybe having a sitter like we talked about before. Not having any distractions coming in. Like, it's really important to just have clear, open time. Like, ideally you have a whole day where you don't have any, ideally have at least one whole day where you don't have
you don't want a DHL delivery in the middle.
Right. You don't want a DHL delivery. You don't want somebody phoning you. You don't want to, even one thing can make a huge difference, or something, it's like, okay, I'm going to take the mushrooms at 10 in the morning, and then at like 7, I have this appointment, but that's okay. That's long enough away. I'll be sober by then. Like, that's still probably not a great idea. Even if, mushrooms last 4 to 6 hours and most of the effects might be gone. That would be my take on it anyway. Better to just have completely open, completely clear time. And, and then the set and setting, like, just knowing that really, like I think we spoke about a little bit last time, really small things can make a huge difference. Like the lighting or certain object or smells, or like a room being messy versus a room being neat. Like, it's a good idea to clean the physical space before having a journey, and sort of think of the physical space as like maybe a reflection of the mental space or something like that. That's just one thing. And have a clean body is nice. Like, take a shower before and sort of put on incense or something. And something that I like to do, my partner and I do, and we do at the retreats, as well as have a fairly like formal container around the experience. Not formal in like a, tuxedos kind of sense, but like a clear opening with some ceremonial aspect to it, and a clear closing. Like, this is sort of the time of the journey, and you can do various things in the opening. Like, I've learned a lot about this from the facilitators that I've worked with, which has been really big advantage, I guess, because I didn't know too much about this beforehand. There's also a book, if people are interested, called Getting Higher by Julian Vane, where he just sort of outlines a whole bunch of different practices that you can do before, during, and after, I think, psychedelic experiences, but doing some sort of container and making that explicit.
Could you give a practical, tangible example of what you would do maybe if you're preparing for a solo journey on LSD or something like that? Just to concretize it a bit.
Sure. So like I said, so cleaning the space, I would definitely do that. Putting things away, making sure that I have the whole day, having some intentions set beforehand, like not the same day, but, over the past days or maybe weeks before, having some intentions written down. Probably letting somebody know that I'm doing it, like a friend, or, if I was living with a roommate, I would let my roommate know. If I was to do it alone, just letting somebody know that it's happening, like, just so they know. That can be a good thing. And then, if something does start to go wrong, or there's an emergency of some sort, then you can reach out to this person, and they sort of know what's happening for you. The ceremonial aspect can be different depending on the person. I mean, I like to meditate at the beginning. I like to, more recently, have been like thanking the medicine. And I used to think that it sounded kind of pretentious to refer to psychedelics as medicine, but actually, over time, it seemed more and more correct to me. Like, they
that's
heal
a primer,
sick,
right? You're priming yourself for healing, right?
Yeah. So thank the medicine, almost relating to the substance as a being. This is something people can do. It's not like you have to, but as if there were like a spirit of the substance. This is especially, I think, a little easier with mushrooms, because people will often get the sense that they're interacting with the mushroom or with like the spirit of the mushroom when they take mushrooms. So you can, and if you've done it a number of times, you can kind of get a feel for it, and almost, not making any metaphysical claims, etc., but just act as if there were something there, some entity that you're inviting in. And like, how would you behave towards this entity if you were inviting it in, or even if you were to think about it as you're entering the domain of the psychedelic? Like, you're going to the house, like the mushroom man's house. Like, how do you want to prepare yourself to go into the mushroom domain?
Right.
So that can be a good framing of it, I think. And how would you if you were going to some like mysterious, powerful being's house? You would be very respectful. You'd be intentional. There's different things that come up for people there. So yeah, I always ask also that it be gentle.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Okay.
That it be gentle and give us what we need, and keep us safe, and everything like that. Yeah. Humility. Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's fun hearing you talk about that, because that's not something, ritual in general is not something that I've experimented with, really. And I mean, like when you said there, I'm not making metaphysical claims, as you know, I can be allergic to those, but I mean, I'm opening up to the possibility that it can just be pragmatic. If you view it that way for this particular time, you don't have to hold on to anything. Yeah, no, I like that. So, okay. So say you've done all of this stuff, and then you ingested the substance, and it's starting, and maybe you've even done it for a while and it feels good, but then all of a sudden you start feeling paranoid, or even if you get a full-on panic, things are starting to go awry and you don't like it. What are the main tips you could give for someone in that situation? What can one do?
I guess there's two approaches to this. So one approach would be
suicide.
Definitely not. Don't. That's a bad joke. That's a bad joke. No, one approach would be to sort of go into it and try to get closer to the thing that seems to be causing the distress, and then the other approach would be to do something external to try to change, sort of like change it from the outside, I guess. I think that's one way to think about it anyway. A lot of the research studies, they will tell people things like go towards the problem, or there's a quote that I really like that is from one of the early psychedelic therapists, and she says something like, go into the vortex, go towards the dragon, like go, if you feel like you're going to die, then go ahead and die. If you feel like you're disintegrating or dissolving, then like do that, disintegrate, dissolve. So that's one approach to it. It's like if you feel like you're exploding or whatever it might be, you're like getting sucked into like a deep hole, like go to the bottom of the hole, see what's down there. That sort of approach.
And that's so counterintuitive.
It's so counterintuitive.
And yet
totally.
It works. It's so brilliant.
It does. Yeah.
Because it's when you're like, especially with something like panic, where if you like you're panicking and then you're panicking about panicking, and it's just an never ending loop. Like, no, I got to get away from this. You try to run from it, and that causes the panic. And so just leaning into it stops the whole circle. That's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah. So that's one approach. And then the other approach would be doing something, I guess approaching it on a different level or something. And sometimes, like I mentioned before, the psychological level, the physical level, maybe other levels, emotional level get intertwined a lot more. Like the boundaries between them just dissolve much more on psychedelics. So sometimes, so like one experience I had, for example, where I was having a lot of anxiety on mushrooms, and I was in my apartment listening to music, and then I lived on a main street at the time, and there would often be sirens going by, like emergency vehicles going by. Either I was hearing sirens or I heard some, and then I kept thinking I was hearing sirens, and I was like, oh my God, the police coming, like I'm doing, that this sort of anxiety. And I tried some of like what I just described, and I tried like being equanimous with it and trying to just sort of meditate through it, or it just wasn't working. I was just super, super anxious for a while. And then eventually I just got up and I changed the music, and I like ate some fruit and started moving my body around. And after a little bit of that, I just felt way, way better. So I think that was an example of this other way of approaching it, where you change the setting, you change what you're doing, like eating stuff. Like people can get low blood sugar, for example, if you haven't eaten,
just get stressed. You
just get stressed. And so you can changing lighting, changing music can be such a huge influencer on the experience. Putting on some different music, or if it gets really bad, then maybe like reaching out to somebody. If you were alone, reaching out to somebody to see if they can come and help you. But again, you'd want that person to be to sort of know what they're doing in that space. I think,
I mean that's funny that you mentioned that, because, and no knock on my dad, he's wonderful, but I called my dad at that point. At the end, he was out on some fancy dinner when I was having that bad trip I mentioned. And he came home and he didn't really know. Like, it sounds so bad now when I've explained how bad it was for me. But first he sat there, and he was trying to calm us. But then when he heard from because he called like doctors or something to hear if it was dangerous, and they were like, no, they just ride it out. And so then he sat there and kind of laughed, and I think he videotaped me.
Oh man, yeah.
And now in retrospect, I realize like how that wasn't optimal.
Yeah.
But
to put it lightly.
But I mean, I can laugh about it now. I processed all that stuff,
That's
but
good.
shit, man.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but so I really like what you said there, because I mean, I've often heard the advice, either you can do deep breathing, which can kind of, stimulate the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, or I've gotten the tip to take a cold shower, which can be a very strong
Interesting.
parasympathetic
Yeah.
activator. But that's kind of that can be a bad trip in and of itself when you're
Right.
sober. So that's not for the faint
Yeah.
of heart. And
Yeah.
but just like you said, just moving your body, getting something to eat, like you mentioned, I think is
Yeah.
highly underrated,
I agree.
especially when people often get the advice to trip on an empty stomach, or fast before, things like that. But many people don't know that one of the most stressful things for our nervous systems is to be undernourished and low blood sugar. Yeah, you can really be in a fight or flight state and be very primed to go into a bad spiral. So eating can also be, I think that's a great tip. Yeah. When you are in a bad spiral, or when you're not feeling good, it can really feel like there's nothing that can change this. Like you said, one fear can be, oh, I'm never going to get out of this. And that feels so tangible. Like, oh, I've always felt this bad and I'm always going to feel this bad.
Yeah.
And then there's such small things can just make a huge difference. And then it becomes the most blissful thing you've ever experienced. So just knowing that beforehand can also be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. About getting sort of stuck in the mindset that nothing could make it better, and then like you like sit up and like suddenly everything's better or something.
Yeah, but that's not even an exaggeration.
Right? No, right? I know.
Which is so cool. Yeah. Okay, so where do you stand on using something like a benzodiazepine, like diazepam or something calming like that, to really kill a bad trip?
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on this. It's not something I've done ever personally. It's not something we've ever done at the retreats with anyone. I could imagine if somebody were potentially violent, or seemed like they were going to cause harm to themselves or to someone else, then it could be a good idea to sort of just tranquilize the person, maybe. But there's a lot of, so that's one view. Yeah, you could use a benzodiazepine to just kind of end a trip. The counter argument is that somebody's in the middle of some really important psychological process, and if you stop that in the middle, then you may end up doing more harm in the long run than if you were to just let them sort of ride it through. Or if you're the person having the difficult time, then it may be better to just ride it out. Again, I don't have a strong opinion on this, and I would be I'd be hesitant to advise one way or the other, because I think it's kind of high stakes and depends a lot on the specific situation. But those are sort of the two sides of it that I can see.
Yeah, no, but that makes sense. I mean, I feel like it can be, if nothing else, to know that you have something like that at hand.
Yeah,
can often be enough to never use it. It's kind of like, a sleeping pill. I don't know. I've had a lot of insomnia, for instance, and just having sleeping pills at home where I know I can take them and sleep, I never need them. Like it's it's crazy how that works, but it makes sense, right? All right, so I want to jump into something that I'm not sure what it means, and it intrigues me. But you mentioned before our first episode, as a talking point, something you called nested arcs and containers as frameworks for thinking about psychedelic experiences. So what do you mean by that, Aaron? That sounds cool.
Yeah. So these are a couple of frameworks you can use to think about approaching or orienting towards taking psychedelics. So nested arcs, I mean, you could imagine like a few, maybe three normal distribution shapes and nested inside of each other, like of different sizes, or nested, or just kind of arcs, like curved lines nested inside of each other. And thinking about these as temporal, so across time, and say the widest or the biggest arc would start when you initially start thinking about having the experience, or maybe when you initially decide that you're going to have the experience. And then it would end at the far other end when you are finished integrating the experience, let's say, or maybe
Right.
maybe you can never totally finish integrating an experience, but far on the other end, it's kind of finished. I guess we could use a retreat example. There's more arcs, let's say, if we're using a retreat example, but if you're going on a retreat, then there's that big arc. You decide you're going to do it, or you start thinking about doing it, and then finally at the other end, you finish integrating. It doesn't have to be a retreat. Could be anywhere you're doing a psychedelic that is not like your home, like you're going out in the woods, or you're going to an Airbnb, or you're going to a friend's house, or whatever. So the next arc would be traveling out to that place or to that space and leaving that space, and that's like another mini arc inside of this arc. And then there could be another one, which is like the ceremony itself, like we talked about, doing a formal kind of ceremony, opening and closing. There's the arc of the actual ceremony, that space, and then inside of that, there's the arc of the actual journey, like the actual subjective experience, when the effects start to come on, when the effects start to finish. And just thinking about how these things relate to each other and sort of how they stack like that, and being intentional, I guess, about each part of this. And there wouldn't always be that many, like people aren't always traveling somewhere else to do a journey, but I don't know. I found this a helpful way to think about it.
Right. That's interesting. What benefit have you gained from, or what do you think is the useful part about thinking about it in those terms?
I think it just helps to bring awareness around entering and exiting the different sort of sections of it all. And again, intentionality, which I feel like is kind of a vague word and maybe isn't that helpful, but yeah, somehow entering and exiting the different arcs, if you like, seems like something to pay a lot of attention to. And
right.
Physical space is changing, psychological space is changing, and just being really thoughtful about those different changes and what to do at the different stages of the changes. Yeah.
Right. And maybe also it could be a useful way to really conceptualize how the journey itself is within a larger container.
Yes.
And something is still ongoing after. I think that could be helpful.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, actually. That's a really good point. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't only start when you ingest the substance. It actually starts long before, and it finishes long after. And generally people will get the most out of it if they approach it in that way, as a whole process, as a longer process, as opposed to just having the 6 hours or the 8 hours or whatever.
Yeah, instinctively, I feel like just having that frame around it would possibly avoid the feeling that, I have to completely transform within this 6-hour experience.
Yeah.
And if I come out of it the day after and I'm not a completely different person, it was useless, or it didn't do what I thought, or it wasn't as valuable as I thought. And I think that can happen. I'm sure you would have a much better, more experience around this, but I'm sure it can happen for people to be completely transformed. But I would assume that that's not the standard benefit people would get.
Not the standard, unfortunately. Maybe
no. But that doesn't mean it can't still be really valuable and transformative.
Yes.
Over a longer period, like when you said that you started to like yourself at 16 last time. I think that was probably, maybe that was a very transformative thing straight away, but that sounded like that was something that just have you've brought with you for a long time, and it's cost a lot of good stuff along the way, I assume. But I don't know, that might be completely off. But
no, I think there's probably some truth to that. I think sometimes we have this idea about insights or realizations where we kind of, something will, like a switch will flip and life will become heaven or something. That's just not how it works. It's like maybe one thing will change, and it will impact you in really subtle ways that are sometimes hard to notice, but still makes a big difference.
Dude, you're not selling in your retreat right now.
Right.
Gotta evangelize.
Yeah. No, I think, but I think your point is really good. I mean, framing it like this helps to emphasize that the preparation and the integration are extremely important, and they should be considered a part of the whole thing, not just the journey. Yeah,
definitely. So, what are fractal insights on psychedelics?
Yeah, so I guess one more point on the arcs thing. There's a sort of
Yep.
so the arc is like a temporal, the temporal dimension. There's also a spatial dimension, and you can think also of nested spaces. So like there's the land or the property or the house or wherever where the experience is taking place, which is kind of like the larger spatial context. Then there's the specific room, or say the hall or the tent or wherever if you're inside.
The porta potty.
And porta potty, yeah.
I feel really hardcore.
and then there's the actual person, the individual, which is kind of a psycho-spiritual, emotional, physical container in some sense for the experience. And so these are different levels, and again, like just thinking about how they interact with one another, and you can imagine like these layers of containers holding the inner space for the healing and the transformation that might emerge. So I find that kind of helpful too. Both the temporal dimension, there's like these different layers, and then also the spatial dimension, there's these different layers.
Right. I like that. I would like to see some kind of visualization of this if someone could create something cool. Like
same, yeah.
Right? If some artist made some cool 3D, yeah, that would be awesome. I really like it.
Nice.
Have you are you still writing? Is this something you would potentially write about in the future?
I'm not writing a lot these days. I would write about it potentially. Yeah. I also thought about doing like a short talk on it potentially. It could be the subject of a short talk at a conference or something like that.
That's cool. Do you have? I mean, you should definitely do a TED talk. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. No, I haven't.
That'd be awesome.
Done a TED talk.
Yeah. No, that's great, man. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I like it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the fractal insight thing. So this was like a tweet thread that I had a while back.
Maybe you're going to, but can you just clarify what fractals are to begin with?
Sure. Yeah, fractal in this context, I mean the same pattern repeats itself at many levels, basically, or at all levels.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting to think about the different types of insights that people can have on psychedelics, and maybe some sort of classification or categorization of insight is pretty interesting. So it seems like there's a certain type of insight where there's like it sounds like there's fractal understanding that you notice something at a particular level or particular layer, and then you realize that thing is mirrored in one or maybe many other contexts in your life. In my experience, at least, it seems like most often this happens where I notice something in a micro context, in micro phenomenological context, almost like moment to moment experience or beliefs or like specific tendencies that are very quick or small, and then I realize there's some bigger context where this thing is mirrored. So, for example, and now I'm kind of just going off what I said in this tweet thread, but it's a good example. There was an experience I had with mushrooms where I was in the forest and I was going up this hill, climbing up a hill, and it was very much kind of this very subtle feeling that things would get a lot better once I reached the top of the hill, basically, and that the trip would get better and there would be a really nice view. And I was just very intent on getting to the top of the hill, and I wasn't really noticing anything else about what was around me or whatever. And then I realized like, oh, so much of my behavior or just thinking about the world is like this very goal oriented behavior where I'm kind of like, I must get to this thing later,
Just got to get
then
done.
yeah, get done, then everything will be better. And
Yeah.
I'm not, and I don't really pay attention to anything else that's
Yeah.
around me while it's happening. I was like, oh, like all of my behaviors like this almost.
Yeah.
So that was one. There's another one. We had a guy visit the retreat, and he was a pretty successful businessman, and he had co-founded a company. I think like 30 to 50 employees, and he came to the retreat, and he was on his journey in this hall where we hold the ceremonies, and everything was seeming really like busy and loud to him, or kind of busy and chaotic, I guess, maybe more accurate, busy and chaotic. And he was just having trouble being with himself and kind of contacting whatever inner aspect of himself that he was intending to, because there's just so much chaos, or he was perceiving that there was so much chaos and busyness around him in the ceremony on the retreat. And then he realized, oh, in my work life, I've surrounded myself with chaos like all the time, and everything's super busy around me all the time. And he's at the center of this company that he's created, and it's really chaotic and messy feeling. And so it was this kind of mirroring, or this fractal aspect to it, where he realized it at one level, and then actually, oh, this applies at another level too. So yeah, that's what I mean.
That's cool. I like that too. I mean, I just want to put a flag in. Remind me if I forget, but I want to ask about, the retreat setting where, how that works when some people are really loud or crying a lot, how that might influence other people's experiences. But before I say, so the insight thing, the fractal insight thing is interesting, because one thing that tends to happen with psychedelics is that you see patterns and find correlations, a lot more of them than you would in everyday consciousness.
Yeah.
And oftentimes to an extreme, when you see faces where there are none, and you see and so you make a lot of connections. And I would say this is what humans do in general. And there's a problem when people do that too much. Like, for instance, I think it's in schizophrenia, people tend to, paranoid schizophrenics, they see so many patterns everywhere where there are none. And so every little thing they see fits into their schema about how they're being followed or stalked, or how all these numbers make sense. And that can be a really big problem, but it can also be a positive thing, like you said here with the fractal insights. I'm curious how that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think conspiracy theorizing has this too, where everything is perceived as being a part of the conspiracy, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a risk. And I mean, I think that going back to the integration piece, that's, if not during the experience itself, then during the integration, hopefully somebody would be able to parse out what the real useful insights are, and which ones are, there's not really like a face in the tree or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point too, that you maybe that during the experience and right after might not always be the time to. They usually say that don't make big life decisions.
Yeah, we say that too. We say that too. Don't make big life decisions for at least a few days. Ideally more, like give it a couple weeks.
Yeah, which makes sense. And I mean, we mentioned David Chapman last time, and I know he's written about how, and this goes for big meditative experiences as well, where you're sober, where once again the experience can't be the only thing that points you in this direction. Like, you need corroborating evidence from other places in your life as well, perhaps, before you draw too big of conclusions. And you might have big false insights, things that really feel like, oh, I got something now. And then a year later you realize that no, this wasn't at all right. So it's good to be open to all of it. Yeah,
totally.
So back to that retreat question. How does that work? Because I've always, and I track this back to this horrible experience where I was with my then girlfriend, and I felt like I couldn't express how I was really feeling in front of her, and I didn't want to be responsible for her. So after that, I've been kind of hesitant to be with other people and tripping because I feel responsible for their states. Now I'm starting to flip that around, and I kind of want to share the journey with other people. But how do you view that in general? The risk of having other people influenced by someone having a bad time versus the rewards of doing it in a group.
Yeah. It's there's definitely a trade-off there. I think it's also a little different context doing it with the friends, for example, people you already know, versus doing it in a retreat where you don't know the people. I think there's a big difference between people. Well, it's a spectrum, but you can have people who are together but having their own journeys, and then you can have people who are together and are very much sharing or sort of intertwining their journeys. And those are really different. For example, at the retreats is much more people are together, but they're all having their own journeys, and we make that pretty explicit and say, everybody has their own mat. There's eye shades that we encourage people to use. There's music playing, so a lot of the minor sort of sounds are drowned out by the music, and we're really encouraging people to go inwards, to focus on their inner experience. That's where most of the transformation, the healing, and the powerful stuff tends to happen is by going in. And so then you have a group of, say, 12 people lying on mats together in the same space, but they're really all focused inward on their own journeys. And then by contrast, something at the other end of the spectrum, for example, I did a group journey once in a house with a group of maybe 7 or 8 other people overnight, mushrooms and LSD. And that was very much more like people were intertwining the different journeys. Like, they were maybe, certainly talking and interacting. Somebody was like would give somebody else a massage, let's say, or at some point one person was, I wasn't involved in this directly, but there was like 3 or 4 people in a circle, and a few of them, 3 of them would like make a noise, and then one of them was like the conductor, and they would like point to each person and have them make this noise and create like a kind of musical thing with these people making noises. Yeah, I mean, at another point, somebody was playing instruments and dancing, dancing together, and just a lot more kind of interactive. So there's a spectrum there, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, and oftentimes it's all a projection of your own inner state. When my initial feeling when you said 7, 8 people together, there was like, oh, that sounds horrifying. So
it totally depends on the people.
Yeah,
and
of course.
Everybody there was a pretty experienced psychonaut, let's call it. So there was an understanding beforehand that everybody could basically take care of themselves. And if something were to go wrong, or like not go wrong, but like if somebody started to feel some type of way, then they would be able to handle it or communicate it to the group in a way that wouldn't be like stressful or harmful to other people. There's just kind of this collective understanding, and when you have a bunch of experienced people, I think that becomes a lot more possible, and then you can kind of just like play in the space where in the space that's at, which is really, really fun and great.
I know I've heard Alan Watts talk about how he had an LSD experience, I think, with his daughter, where they kind of met in that space. He's wonderful to listen to in general, but that story of his is really, really cool. But when you said psychonaut, I just instantly felt like I'm a psychonaut. That's my new
nice.
That's my new
I don't think I've ever heard that one before.
No, me neither. Yeah.
You just coined it.
Yeah, man, psychonaut. I have the proof here on the podcast. Yeah.
Nice.
No, that's really cool, man. On the retreat point, Are you aware of any specific retreat centers in Holland for psilocybin that you would recommend?
Good question. Yeah. So I haven't attended any myself in Holland. Let's see. So there's one called Synthesis, which is probably the most well known. And they are, I don't think they're operating right now or they weren't recently because of COVID stuff still happening in the Netherlands, but
Yeah.
they've been operating since I think 2018. And as far as retreats go, are definitely on the higher end and also sort of like have it together a lot more than a lot of
Right.
retreats do. I think they approached it really as a real business and have a bunch of employees now and raised funding. And I think they own their own property in the Netherlands. And I know a few people on the Synthesis team. Again, I haven't been on the retreats myself, but it seems like they're doing a great job as far as I can tell.
Are you aware of Essence Institute?
Yeah, it rings a bell. I'm less familiar with them. I think I've seen their
Okay.
website before.
Yeah.
There's also there's the UK Psychedelic Society that runs retreats in the Netherlands. And they used to be called, I think, just Psychedelic Experience Retreats or something. And then they've changed the name to Alaloho. I think it's Alaloho, which is very hard to very hard to remember and pronounce.
Yeah,
But Alaloho, yeah, alaloho.org. And again, I know a friend of mine went on their retreat back when it had the other name and spoke very, very highly of it. And at the time, they were basically running it as a nonprofit. I think they might have shifted into a for-profit model. I'm not sure, but those are the main two that come to mind for me. I also have a friend who was running a retreat called New Moon. I don't think they're operating anymore, but that was another one. There's a lot though. There's a few websites that sort of act as directories for retreats,
right? Like TripAdvisor for actual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So people can find, but there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot in the Netherlands. There's also individual guides people can work with. People who, you just have a sitter and work one-on-one with them.
Do you have any experience with ayahuasca personally?
I don't actually. I would like to. I've sort of been waiting for the right opportunity, which may be coming soon. I'm not sure. But
oh, cool.
No, it's something I'm very curious about. I've smoked DMT a couple of times.
Oh,
which is like the ingredient, the main psychoactive in ayahuasca, which is obviously very different from drinking ayahuasca, but something I'm interested in. Yeah, for sure.
How was your experience with DMT? I've never tried that.
Like an order of magnitude more bizarre and strange than something like LSD or mushrooms.
Wow.
Yeah. But also like less helpful, I guess. The main helpful outcome for me was just seeing how bizarre things could be or how different they could be. It was like, whoa, it could be like that. That is insane.
Okay.
And then, but it wasn't, it wasn't therapeutic for me, or it wasn't kind of insightful or even necessarily profound in the same ways that the other psychedelics are. So,
I mean, I guess it's so transpersonal, perhaps, and far away from your everyday life.
Yeah, it was like just.
That's great. I mean, I'm gonna butcher this whole theory because I don't know much about it. But have you heard of neural annealing?
Yes. Yeah. QRI.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they speak about there's something about symmetry in their theory about what's going on with psychedelics, and that DMT is one of the best ones for this, according to their theory, which is interesting.
It might be 5-MeO DMT, which is different from NN-DMT.
I distinctly remember them saying DMT, but that could be
okay. Maybe you're right.
It could be
Oh
a
no,
thing.
you might be right. There's a talk on YouTube called The Hyperbolic Geometry of DMT by
For fuck's sake. Yeah.
Andres, who's
Yeah.
he's one of the co-founders of QRI, who
Oh, yeah.
originated I don't know if they originated the neural annealing idea. I think they did, but then their theory is called the symmetry theory of valence. And
Yes. Yes.
I'm not by any means very knowledgeable about this, but as far as I understand, it's something like they think that consciousness can be computationally modeled, and positive states are related to like mathematical symmetry in consciousness, or something, or consciousness can be mathematically modeled, and states correlate to different amounts of symmetry, something like
Right.
that.
Right.
Yeah. I would plug those guys, even though I'm not smart enough to understand a lot of what they talk about.
I mean, yeah, I remember listening to some 2-hour podcast with that guy you mentioned there, I think, and just finding it very intriguing and original sounding, but without really getting what they were saying. Yeah. But I do like the higher level point of heating up your psyche more or less like a metal and then making it very plastic to change on something like a psychedelic.
Yep.
That's how I understood that. But yeah, it sounded interesting. Yeah.
The neural annealing. Yeah. I think there's a few posts by Michael Johnson, who's another one of the QRI founders, about this.
Mm-hmm.
Probably if people search neural annealing, there'll be neural annealing toward a neural theory of everything.
Oh yeah, that sounds familiar. QRI is the Qualia Research Institute or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. Then there was a paper by Robin Carhart Harris and Carl Friston where they called Rebus, which is like a sort of questionable acronym for relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. And basically it was describing, which is a very dense paper and also like just really technical, but kind of describing the same thing, like quote unquote heating up the brain, and the top down priors becoming sort of looser and the bottom up.
Right. I mean, it is very interesting, I think, that over patterning, finding too much pattern and correlations that are just pseudo correlations or not actually meaningful. If you do it in the right container, it seems like it often goes in the right direction. Like it tends towards useful insights, which I find interesting. What's going on there? Because it might just have been that it was just as much nonsense as useful stuff.
Right.
But it seems like people are really getting. Do you see what I mean by that?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, you can speculate about the universe being a loving and benevolent thing, but
well, starving kids in Africa.
No, yeah, of course.
Right. So, Aaron, I want to end on a question that I got from, I don't know what to call him, producer. I don't know if I know what that word means, but that's what I usually call him, my podcast producer. But he helps me with editing, gives me an eye on what to cut and what to keep and things like that. He's great. I'm going to shout out to Nicholas Lundmark. How are you, Nick? And he asked me to ask you what you think of theories about connecting with extra-dimensional beings on psychedelics. Like things like machine elves that people talk about on DMT. And you've been on DMT yourself, so did you meet any extraterrestrials there? Or what do you think about that?
I did meet some sort of beings on DMT.
Oh wow.
Yeah, they did. They were like little gnomes.
Really?
Yes, yeah. Whether that's because, I knew about the sort of machine elves concept from Terrence McKenna already, but there were little gnomes chattering in some language that I didn't understand.
Wow.
Yeah. So obviously it's an experience people can have. Are people actually being contacted with other beings? I have no idea. Like nobody knows, right? Nobody knows. Nobody really knows the answer to that.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. I guess the argument is what? That since so many people have the same experience, there must be something there, or
I guess so. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if anybody's really. I mean, some people are, but
Terence McKenna, right?
yeah, sure, Terence McKenna. I don't know if there's any. I don't know if there's any obvious reason to believe that that's what's happening. But again, I don't know. I'm less familiar with DMT generally and research on DMT and phenomenology of DMT and than compared to the other psychedelics. So I think there's people actually doing interesting stuff with extended DMT. So normally if you smoke DMT, then it lasts for maybe 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, which is very short. And often people also forget really quickly afterwards. That happened to me. Like most of it, I just forgot within like a couple of minutes of coming back.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. Really, really quickly. I mean, my friend said, like, write it down because you're going to forget. And then I wrote down a few things, but it just goes quickly, or it did, at least did for me. And it does for other people too. So some people are working on, they're calling it DMTX, which is basically keeping people in the DMT state for much longer. I think like hours even.
Oh, that sounds so terrifying. All right.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah. So probably we'll learn a lot more about it if they're able to pull that off.
Okay, so it's fair to say that wasn't the conclusion you drew when you came back, that you had communicated with extra dimensional beings.
Maybe I did. I don't know. I have no idea. I had the experience of there being little gnome-like figures there. Whether that actually happened in some other dimension or not, I have no idea.
As a Canadian, I hope you were nice to them, right?
Of course.
Naturally. You have no other choice.
Right. Yeah, it's in our constitution. We actually otherwise you get kicked out. Oh.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, man. I mean, always a blast talking to you.
Cool.
I'm sure we're gonna do this again. I hope.
Super fun.
And
I'd be happy to.
I'm gonna edit down your audio so it still sounds a little worse than mine, but I'm glad you have a new mic.
Same here.
All right, man. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah.